مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. حقوق الإنسان مسودة إعلان الاستقلال تتحدث عن الحياة، عن الحرية والسعي طلبا للسيادة. لكن الحكومات الذين كتبوا دستورنا ناسوا أمر الحقوق، فتعين علينا إضافة التعديلات العشرة الأولى في سورة وثيقة الحقوق. لم يبدأ الأميركيون حتى أواسط القرن العشرين في التفكير في دور الحقوق الإنسان في السياسة الخارجية، حتى رأى جنودنا أحوال الهولوكوست في أوروبا وفدائي اليابانيين في آسيا. أولى بطلاتنا لحقوق الإنسان كانت إلينور روزفلت زوجة رئيسنا. لكن في نظر الكثيرين وخاصة مجموعة تسمى الواقعيين، حقوق الإنسان رفاهية وليست مصلحة استراتيجية من مصالح الولايات المتحدة. ذلك الجدل مستمر اليوم. ما الدور الذي يجدر بحقوق الإنسان لعبه في السياسة الأمريكية الخارجية؟ هل يمثل أولية كبرى أم محض تفضيل؟ هل يجدر بنا الحكم على حلفائنا وفق الطريقة التي يساعدوننا بها أم الطريقة التي يعملون بها شعوبهم؟ لمناقشة دور حقوق الإنسان في السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية وخاصة حيال الشرق الأوسط، يسرني أن أرحب بأحد أهم الخبراء في البلاد وهو تشارلز دان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here today with Charles Dunn to talk about human rights and American foreign policy. Charles, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. Why should human rights matter?
Well, I've argued for a long time, and I really do believe this, that human rights are an essential foreign policy interest of the United States. It's been an interest of the United States since very early in the Republic. Thomas Jefferson saw and wrote that the United States is, quote unquote, an empire of liberty, and it should expand its influence in this area and try to promote good governance in the world, because our interests lay in stronger relationships with countries that shared our interests and were therefore more stable. And I think we see this a lot in the Middle East today, for example, where, promotion of democracy and human rights, which I think really do go hand in hand, lead to more stable countries, stronger relationships with the U.S.
So when we talk about the term human rights, let's take that apart for a minute. What actually are we referring to? I mean, in our Declaration of Independence, we talk about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Are we talking about that, or something more detailed, something broader than that?
I think we are talking about something more detailed. When you break it down, okay, and I used to work for Freedom House as the director of Middle East programs, and we thought a lot about this. And to me, what this means is guarantees of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, which means being able to gather together in groups larger than 10, 30, 50 to discuss political issues. It means respect for women's rights, minority rights, religious rights, guarantees in law. And it also means to me, and I think to a lot of other people, transparency in government and rule of law. All of these, I think, are not only part of human rights, but essential building blocks for democracy.
And just that last word, what is the connection between human rights and democracy? Can you have one without the other?
Right. No, I don't think you really can. Because what we've seen in a lot of parts of the world, you can have the trappings of a democracy, right? You can have elections, you can have parliaments and so on, but without the real democracy, in other words, rubber stamp parliaments rulers who are authoritarians, but like to have elections, right? Because they like those trappings of legitimacy, which they can not only present to their own people as, well, you know, I'm ruling with the consent of the governed, but they can most importantly present those to allies and foreign investors, saying we are a democracy, we're a republic, we have rule of law. But you've got to have all of these other things that go hand in hand with the legal trappings of a democracy in order to make a real democracy, in my opinion.
And what would the response be to a government or someone who says, sure, human rights, we have group rights, the right to, everyone has health care, everyone has a place to live, everyone has a job, but individual rights, well, we're not so sure about that. You know, there's a difference between collective rights and individual rights.
Look, all of those rights that you just mentioned are important, but unless you have the right to stand up there and criticize the government, unless you have the right to cast a meaningful vote, unless you have the right as a woman to drive or to participate in politics, I mean, all of those other things are not really helpful in terms of constructing a real democracy.
And, I mean, I assume, I mean, nobody likes to prioritize these things. Are some rights more important than other rights?
I think some are, and in specific, I think that if you're talking about genuine democracy, okay, I think that the rights to freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and guaranteed rights of minorities and women are among the most essential. And without those, nothing else is terrifically meaningful.
All right, let's take this conversation and put it in the context of a discussion about American national security and foreign policy. One will often hear the comment, sure, I'm all for human rights, but look, let's be serious. This is a luxury. This isn't a core interest of the United States government. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I say this battle has gone back and forth for decades, literally. And obviously, Ronald Reagan and others helped to found the National Endowment for Democracy. And this is based on the idea that this was a core interest of the United States, and its promotion needed to be effected in order to defend United States interests, right? President Bush, George W. Bush, with his broader Middle East and North Africa program, also put this at the core of United States interests. All of these presidents, in my view, when push came to shove and there was an apparent conflict between security interests, fighting terrorism, fighting wars, thought that we can shove these interests to the side. What I would argue is that we should give them equal priority in when we talk to foreign governments, both privately and publicly, because they will ultimately contribute to stability and avoid the kinds of things that, you know, we need to avoid, including you know, intensive fights against terrorism, fighting wars against undemocratic countries. That's what I believe.
So you cited President Reagan, George W. Bush. When you look back on the last half century or so, can you say whether the promotion of human rights was a Democratic or Republican issue, or is this something that has historically crossed political lines?
I think it's been historically a bipartisan issue. And neither party can lay claim to exclusive authorship. I mean, the foundation of the National Endowment for Democracy was definitely a bipartisan undertaking and has received support from both parties. The formation of the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, who have very prominent people on both sides, have historically cooperated intensively on issues of democracy promotion and human rights, not only in the Middle East but elsewhere. and have received bipartisan funding. So I do believe that it's a national issue and not a partisan issue.
And by the same token, those who would argue against prioritizing human rights also cross party lines.
That is very true. The foreign policy so-called realists, believe that, this is a nice issue, and if we can do it, let's do it. But we have security interests, we have military interests, and other things. And I was a foreign policy professional for many years, and after leaving government, and even before, when I was working on a lot of these issues in the policy planning staff at the State Department, I became convinced that foreign policy realism is a little bit overrated, that there are certain things that we should be doing as a matter of principle and as a priority, and that they can be done at the same time as we're prioritizing these other important security issues. They are not in conflict, and they shouldn't be in conflict in the way we approach how we think about this.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk more with Charles Dunn about how America can promote human rights, especially in the Middle East, in just a moment. Again, my guest is Charles W. Dunn. Charles brings firsthand experience on the front lines of diplomacy and advocacy to his work in support of a foreign policy infused with respect for human rights. He is currently a visiting fellow at Freedom House, one of the leading voices on human rights in the world. He is also a visiting scholar at the Middle East Institute and the National Defense University. Previously, he directed Freedom House's programming throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Prior to joining Freedom House, Charles spent 24 years as a diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service, with postings in Cairo, Jerusalem, and Madras, India. Here in Washington, he served as Director for Iraq at the National Security Council and as a member of the Secretary of State's policy planning staff, focused on political reform and democracy in the broader Middle East. A frequent media commentator, Charles received his master's degree from Georgetown University. So let's focus for a moment on the Middle East. What's an example of something that we're doing right in terms of human rights promotion in the Middle East? I want to get the good news out before I focus on where could we do better.
That's kind of a tough question. Look, I think one of the success stories of U.S. policy has been its support for Tunisia, and U.S. government just recently increased economic and security support for the Tunisian government, which is, according to Freedom House's annual report, Freedom in the World, the only electoral democracy in the Middle East, except for, of course, Israel at this point. And that is the big success story of the Arab Spring that we've seen so far. I think the current administration has given a lot of rhetorical support to democracy and political reform. It hasn't often acted on it in a lot of countries.
So this is a good lead into where have we gone, in your view, off the rails? Where have we gone wrong in the promotion of human rights in the Middle East?
In my view, the United States has been scared off by the instability and all the knock-on effects of what has happened in the Arab Spring in Syria, in Libya, in Egypt certainly, Bahrain, and has decided to back off to a very large extent in terms of what it's willing to pressure governments to do in terms of answering the political needs of their own citizens. And I think in some cases, and I'm thinking here specifically of the case of Egypt, that has given this government in particular, but others as well, a sense of carte blanche to crack down on its own citizens. I mean, under the guise of fighting terrorism, which is critically important, yes, but that is often defined very broadly to include fighting citizens who wish to organize politically, engage in civil society work, demonstrate peacefully, against policies that they think their governments are pursuing that are wrong. And I think the United States has been extremely reluctant, especially in the last year and a half, to call these governments to account on that.
Now, the United States has a wide variety of tools to advance these objectives. And I want to ask you about the efficacy and when you choose one over the other. Sometimes it's we can use the bully. We can talk about foreign policy, about human rights. Sometimes we can use assistance as a lever with conditioning. Sometimes we give money to specific groups. What works and when does it work?
As you point out, it's a really complicated question, and the answer is going to be different depending on the time and the country. A number of years ago, the Egyptian activist Saad-ed-Din Ibrahim was imprisoned. The United States, under the Bush administration, decided to withhold something like $400 million in aid, and this really got the Egyptian government's attention and helped to advance a resolution of the Saad-ed-Din case. Also, in the case of Egypt, certain military assistance was held up within the last couple of years. Again, this kind of infuriated the Egyptian government, but it did also draw their attention to some of the human rights abuses that were going on and the need to at least pay lip service to kind of resolving them. I personally believe that more of our military and security assistance should be right-sized for some of these countries.
What is right-sized?
Okay, sorry. Let me explain that. Some countries want the big-ticket military items, the huge weapon systems.
The airplanes,
Apache
the tanks.
helicopters, exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Very sophisticated because they're prestige items, but not necessarily pertinent to their actual defense needs. So for example, a country like Egypt needs more counterterrorism assistance, not new M1A1 tanks. And the United States should be, I think, aiming some of its military aid towards these countries in that sense. In other words, give them what they need, not what they want. But also there should be some human rights conditions on some of this aid. The Leahy law has, in my view, not been followed consistently.
This is a law named after Senator Patrick Leahy. And what is the substance of this law?
And the substance of the law is that the United States is not allowed to provide military aid to specific units that have violated human rights. But in many cases, the United States hasn't investigated these units and continues to provide military assistance to units that are, frankly, suspect. So there are tools in U.S. law that can be used to enforce human rights obligations on some of these countries, especially the security forces.
Okay, so we only have a little bit of time left. You walk into the Oval Office, new president next January, whoever he or she may be. Charles, what should I do? You have 5 minutes, or you have 1 minute. What's my priority, Charles?
Yes. In terms of human rights in the Middle East, I think, first of all, a lot of damage has been done in this current campaign when speaking about these issues and giving people the impression that the United States simply doesn't care or is actively hostile to political change and democratization in the region. The next president should reverse that, first of all, rhetorically, by saying the right things on these issues. Second of all, the next president needs to go out and actively support, through our diplomatic corps and even our military, who has a lot of engagement with foreign governments, to say we are going to be supporting civil society, we are going to be supporting activists, we will meet with them, people who are working on behalf of human rights and positive political change in these regions. Those are the two most important things that the next president can do in his or her first 15 minutes in the Oval Office. And then take a look at expanding assistance to civil society. A lot of our assistance in the last couple of years has been increasingly reoriented towards supporting security issues. I mean, and these are important issues, but less focus has been placed on supporting democratization, good governance, and you know, people who are working on behalf of human rights. And I think that's the next thing that could be done. And it has to be an effort that involves all of the government agencies, and not just State Department, or not just, you know, an official here and an official there, a whole of government effort.
Charles Dunn, thank you very much for joining us
My
at
pleasure.
Dakhel, Washington.
Really.
Thank you. وهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول وضع حقوق الإنسان في بلدكم، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.